Welcome to Allied Real Estate School's Exam Cram. My name is Dwight Norris, and I'm going to help you pass the real estate exam for the state of California. I have been licensed as a real estate broker in the state of California for more than 20 years. I used to be a certified residential appraiser, and over the last 12 plus years, I have been active in teaching and speaking and writing on various real estate and appraisal topics. We're going to go through the workbook that I had a hand in preparing and that you may have in front of you. And you'll notice that the workbook, if you're familiar with the California Real Estate Principles textbook by Sherry Schindler Price, used by Allied Schools, this is the sequence and chapters that we're going to follow in the workbook. You'll notice it follows along directly according to the same chapters, so the organization will be easy if you're familiar with the book. If you're not familiar with the book, it doesn't matter. We're covering all of the topics that the Department of Real Estate suggests to the public that they need to be familiar with to pass the real estate test. And so as we go through this, I want to give you some tips on actually taking the test. First of all, I suggest that you read the premise of the question carefully enough to pick up on little words like not. I mean, that changes everything, doesn't it? And accept. Accept is easy to miss. Where does accept usually appear? Usually the last word of the premise of the question. And if you miss the word accept, you can't properly understand the question. As a matter of fact, when the correct answer is revealed, you can't understand how that could possibly be the correct answer until all of a sudden you see it, accept, and now everything falls into place. One good thing that I'm hearing is that words like not and accept sometimes are capitalized or in bold print or underlined in the premise of the question. And that helps us to see it. And so it's not so much a matter of getting tricked. It's more about the substance of what is on the test. But there's also words like least and most and always and never. These all qualify the question. And so we have to be sure to pick those up in the premise of the question. We also need to read the answer choices carefully enough to really understand what they're telling us. For example, you may be proud of the fact that you have absolutely memorized that there are 43,560 square feet in an acre. And the question says, how many square feet in an acre? Well, you know this one for sure, so you jump on choice A. Congratulations, you just got that one wrong, and that was one that you knew for sure. If you had taken the time to multiply out one of the other choices, you'd realize that all of them equal 43,560. And D is the only answer choice that will get you a point on this question. So sometimes it seems like they're out to get you just a little bit. We need to kind of train our minds to stay ahead of that, and that's what we're going to be doing in this course. I want to give you a strategy for moving through these 150 questions on the test. And most people don't do this. Most people just answer question 1 through 150 in the sequence they come to them, regardless of the level of difficulty. What I suggest you do is you put a little chart on your scratch paper, something like this, a little single check mark and a double check mark column chart. Now you look at question number 1, you'll say, well, I've seen that one, go ahead and answer it. Number 2, you know that one, go ahead and answer it. But you come to number 18. Now number 18 is about that long. You've heard of the issues in there, but it's going to take you a while to sort it out. So not right now. Number 18 goes over in the single checkmark column, skip it, and move on. 19's easy, 20 you can answer, go ahead and answer them. But you come to number 32. Now number 32, you have no earthly idea where they got this information. You have never heard of it. So at this point in time, number 32 is impossible for you to answer. Number 32 goes over in the double checkmark column, skip it, and move on. Now do this all the way through the test, and you will get through the entire test rather quickly. And then what you do is you go back first to the single checkmark column, focus on those questions one at a time, give it your best answer, and then go to the double checkmark column and do the same thing. Now look at the alternative. If you try to answer number 32 when you first see it, you could struggle for 15 or 20 minutes with number 32. And in the end, you're going to guess anyway. But what's happened to your attitude by this time? You're starting to become time conscious. You know you spent too much time on it. You're starting to wonder how many more questions are there like this one on the test. You don't know. You haven't seen the rest of the test yet. And you're starting to think that maybe Mom was right. Maybe I have no business trying to get a real estate license. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. These are only questions. Nobody knows everything. So you found some that you don't know. So what? Sort them out. Prioritize. If you happen to get number 32 correct, how many points do you get for number 32? You get 1 point. If you happen to know what a kiosk is, how many points do you get for that? You get 1 point. Now, I'll take the kiosk any day. I want to show you how effective this little strategy is. I had a gentleman call me a number of months ago regarding flunking the test, and he got a 69%. And he was pretty discouraged, and he wanted some advice. And I asked him, I said, did you do the double checkmark column strategy? He said, well, I heard you mention it. I said, yes, I sure did mention it. He said, but that was early on in the class. And I said, yeah, I mentioned it right up front, but I still mean it. He didn't do this little strategy. And I'm convinced that if he knew nothing more than what he knew when he took the test, if he had done this strategy, he would have gotten 5 or 6 additional correct answers, and he would have passed the test. Back on January of 2002, I was approached by a company to write a book on the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. We call it USPAP for short. And it's kind of like the ethical and the legal backbone of the appraisal profession. And I told them right away, I'm not qualified to write that book. And they said, well, there's this class. See, USPAP is a very technical document. And the people from Washington, D.C., members of the Appraisal Standards Board, were starting to teach a class once a month all across the country to create what they called certified USPAP instructors. USPAP had been taught according to everybody's different interpretation. Everybody had their own ideas, what this meant, what that meant. So they wanted to have a cadre of teachers that all had the basic same understanding of what this document meant. And so the very first class of this nature was in January of 2002 in Los Angeles, California. And being that it was the very first class of this nature, people flew in from all over the country. And there were 40 people in the class, and present company accepted, I would say that this was the elite, sophisticated, cream of the crop of appraisers from all over the country. Well, it was a 2.5-day class, and the class was challenging and sophisticated, and we heard things about USPAP that we had never heard before. They would get into the intent of this paragraph and the intent of that. And on the morning of the third day, we had to take a multiple choice exam of 120 questions. The questions were written such that all of the above and none of the above were never used. It was just 4 subtle distinctions among the choices. And judging from the results of the test, what I heard was that a whopping 12 out of the 40 managed to pass. Well, I looked at this test, and I looked through the first 10 questions without answering any of them. And I thought, what are they talking about? Where are they coming from here? It was like reading a foreign language. And so I had scratch paper, and I put my chart on the scratch paper. And I started skipping questions. And I'm skipping a lot of questions. In fact, I'm skipping so many questions, my columns are getting so long, I've got to get some extra scratch paper. And finally, I would come across a question, I would say, okay, I know where they're coming from here, I can answer that one. At least I didn't get shut out. I got one. I'd skip a few more questions. Then I'd come across another one. I'd say, okay, I know what they mean by this. And I could answer that one. So I'm starting to pick off a few questions here and there. When I got through with the 120 questions and I looked back at my chart, I discovered that I had to skip a whole lot more questions than I was able to answer. But when I went back to that single checkmark column, a funny thing happened. Those questions that I initially had to skip didn't seem so mysterious anymore. And what happened was the test had started to unfold for me. Just by processing the information in the questions, I was starting to recall the information I had been exposed to in the previous couple of days. And so now I'm picking up momentum and I'm starting to be able to answer some questions. And I will tell you that you will get a higher score on any test you take, whether it's a law school admission test or whatever it might be, by using this simple strategy. You just got to do this. When they give you the scratch paper, you put your name on it. Once they say ready, begin, the first thing you should do is put your double check mark column chart and be sure to use it. Again, the single check mark column is questions you're familiar with, but it's very involved. It's a long question. It's going to take you a while to figure it out. Don't stop your momentum. Put them over in the single check mark column. Column number 2, the double check mark column, is for questions that you look at, you have no idea what they're talking about. You have never heard of this. It's impossible for you to answer right now. But you may be surprised by the end of the test. Some information may be revealed from subsequent questions. That being true, now you can answer this other one. You've got to let the test unfold for you in that way. So let's get ready now. Get your workbook in front of you. Get something to write with. Get comfortable. And let's get ready to pass this test. Chapter 1, Property, Estates, and Ownership. Property is something that can be owned, so in statement number 1, fill in the word owned. Property is something that can be owned. But in a sense, you cannot own the thing outright. You can only have rights and interests to it. So in statement number 2, let's write in rights or interests in what is owned. I had an experience a number of years ago that kind of brought this home in a rather vivid way. There was an ad in the newspaper for a 40-unit motel in the city of Riverside, California, and it was for sale for $100,000. And I thought, wow, 40-unit motel for $100,000 sounded like a pretty good price. So I grabbed my checkbook and I headed out to Riverside, but I knew I had some homework to do, I had some research to do. I locate the motel, and the motel was in a good section of the city in the old downtown area. It was clean. It was doing a thriving business. But in doing my research, I come to find out that the people that were operating the motel as a business had leased it from the owners for a period of 40 years. And so when we look at this motel, we can't just look at the brick and the mortar and the asphalt parking lot and all of this. We're looking at the rights and interests, and the owner of the motel is selling his rights and interests. And so what he had was the fee simple ownership of this motel, but he was not receiving most of the income from it. He was receiving just a very small portion of the income. The value was in the leasehold estate, and the people that were operating it as a business who had leased it from him were earning most of the money, the vast majority of the money. And in my opinion, you could have taken your $100,000 and done almost anything with it other than buy the motel, and you would have received a greater return. So when we deal with property, we're not just dealing with the physical aspects of the property, we're dealing with the rights and interests that the person has. When we list a property or appraise a property, we need to be very aware of the rights and interests. That's really what is owned, and that really defines what property is. Now, statement number 3 says that property is divided into 2 basic categories, real property and personal property. Let's write in real and personal. And let's talk about real property first. Statement 4 says that real property is generally regarded as immovable property. Write in the word immovable. And when we own real property, we think of having a bundle of rights in our ownership. You could think of holding a bundle of pencils in your hand. You've got this one, you've got this one, you've got this one. Well, in the ownership of real property, you have a bundle of rights. For example, you have the right to, let's just look at this acronym here, CPUD. The basic categories are control, possession, use, and disposition. Let's write those in. Control, possession, use, and disposition. You have control of the property. You can control who enters into the property. You can allow somebody else to get possession of the property. You could lease it out. You can extract minerals from the property. You could sell it, you could encumber it, you could improve it, you could do nothing with it. Many different rights associated with the ownership of the property. And you can dispose of one of these rights at a given time, or you can dispose of all of them at a given time. If you lease it to someone else, you've given up one right, that of possession, and you maintain all of the other rights. If you sell the mineral rights to the property, you have given up one right and you retain all of the other rights. Or you could just sell the property outright and part with all of the rights in one transaction. So we have a bundle of rights, and we need to be keenly aware of what rights are involved when we deal with people's property. Now, Statement 6 says that real property has three aspects. Fill in three. One is the land. Number two is things affixed to the land. And number three is things incidental to the land or appurtenances. We'll talk about all of these. First of all, land itself. Statement number 7 says land includes the material of the earth. Let's do some filling in here. Land includes the material of the earth, rock, soil, and other substances. Material of the earth, rock, soil, and other substances. If you look at this chart on the board here, this shows that beneath the surface of the land there are other substances. There may be rock, there may be valuable minerals, there may be water, in some locations there may be oil. All sorts of substances comprise what the land really is. And when you own land, you don't just own the surface of it. The legal concept is that you own the land beneath the surface, theoretically down to the center of the earth, and you also own the airspace above your land up to the farthest reaches of the sky. Now, this brought into account some issues. When we started flying around this earth around the turn of the century, Congress became aware that this could create some problems. And so in the 1920s, they created a couple of laws that stated that the United States government has the sovereignty of the skies. And so a person who owns a little 5,000 square foot lot cannot look up and say, hey, I think a plane just passed through my airspace, and try to collect a fee for it. That's not legal. But closer down to the earth, it certainly has meaning, and we have the rights to the airspace above and to the space beneath the surface, theoretically all the way down to the center of the earth. Now, the other aspect of real property is things affixed to the land. We're talking about fixtures. And let's read statement number 8. It says, some objects that were once personal property can become real property if they are attached to the land in such a way as to become fixtures. Let's write in the word fixtures. Now, statement number 9 gives us the basic tests for a fixture. And we have this acronym MARIA, the lady's name Maria. And next to M, let's write in the method of attachment. Method of attachment. We're going to write them all in, and then I'm going to talk about all of these. The A, the first A there, is adaptability of the item. Let's write in adaptability of the item. The R is relationship of the parties. Relationship of the parties. I is intention. And the last A is agreement between the parties. Agreement between the parties. First of all, the method of attachment. Is it permanently attached, or is it just kind of temporarily fixed up there so that it can be easily removed? And that would be the intention of the owner. The method of attachment is important. Years ago, when I was active in appraising, satellite dishes were kind of large in those days. And sometimes you would see a huge satellite dish mounted up on its own concrete foundation in the backyard. I was appraising a house one time, and I was in the backyard, and one of these huge satellite dishes was mounted on the top of a wooden patio cover, and it was attached with simply 2 nuts and bolts. And somehow I got the idea that the owner of this property was rather proud of the satellite dish. My suspicion was that he was going to be taking the dish with him when he moved. And so I asked him, when you move, are you going to take the satellite dish with you? And he stuck out his chest and he said, you bet. And so indeed, that was personal property. It wasn't really permanently attached. It was attached sort of enough to have it up there, but the intention was to take it. So the method of attachment is one of those tests for a fixture. The first A, the adaptability of the item. And what that means is, how easily can this item be used somewhere else? Some years ago, I sold a house as a broker. And for some reason, after the close of the transaction, the little remote control garage door clicker wound up in the trunk of my car. Now, Obviously, it's small, it's lightweight, it's mobile, and it's not very expensive. But what is that item for? It has really only one purpose, and that is to open that particular garage door. And so, despite the fact that this item was not physically attached, because of the adaptability of the item and its single purpose, the owner was right. She definitely had a right to receive the garage door clicker. And so the adaptability of the item is another test. R is the relationship of the parties. And we're talking about growing crops here. When we're talking about between a landlord and a tenant, the growing crops are regarded as personal property because the law recognizes that the tenant has something to do with the cultivation of those crops, and he's going to be able to harvest those crops as personal property even after the expiration of a lease. But if it's between a buyer and a seller, then the crops, the trees, all of the vegetation needs to be there at close of escrow because that's part of what the buyer is expecting to receive as value for the money that he's paying for the property. So the relationship between the parties is another test for a fixture. The I stands for intention, and sometimes intention can override some of the other factors. For example, there was a house in Beverly Hills that I'd heard of that had a painting that was plastered into the wall. And the painting was supposedly worth about $250,000. And it was plastered into the wall, not hanging on the wall, but plastered into the wall. The purpose, though, was not to incorporate it into the real property and make it real property. The purpose was to protect it. And the people wanted it to be very difficult for somebody to steal that painting. And they also wanted to protect it from possible earthquake damage. But when it comes time to sell that house, they would say to the broker, you see that painting over there? That's ours. We're going to take it with us, and we're going to have it removed from the wall. We'll restore the wall to the original condition, but we're taking the painting with us. So the intention in this case would override the fact that it was permanently attached into that wall. And then finally, agreement between the parties. Two parties can agree to regard any item of property as personal or as real. What it really comes down to is, does it stay with the house or does it go with the seller? And sometimes there's items like chandeliers that are attached, but they agree that the seller is going to have it removed and replace it with a less expensive item or whatever the agreement might be. But agreement is one of those tests, so you would have to understand what the agreement was. So just remember this lady's name, Maria, in connection with tests for a fixture, and you'll be able to identify all 5 tests. Notice that the time of attachment is not a test for a fixture. It doesn't matter if the item has been up there for 5 years or 5 minutes. That is not the issue. And the cost of the item is not a test for a fixture. Doesn't matter if it costs $5,000 or 5 cents. Just not the issue. So those two will not play into the decision-making process here. Now, statement number 10 says, naturally growing crops which replenish themselves, like fruit trees, are considered real property, right in real property. They grow out of the land and are attached to the land by roots. No one is responsible really for creating these crops because they replenish themselves. They can certainly be made better by some attention, but they do replenish themselves, and so they're considered real property, barring any of the other tests. Now let's talk about items incidental to the land. These are what we call appurtenances. Statement number 11 says, appurtenances are items incidental to the land. Examples are, and we have some blanks to fill in here, examples are covenants, right in covenants, which is a promise or an agreement. Water company stock, right in water company stock. Sometimes someone buys a property in a rural area and they are not on any kind of a city main water system. They may not have individual wells, but they may be part of a small community that has a mutually owned private water company. And when they buy a property in that particular district, they're going to receive shares of stock in this mutually owned water company. It will entitle them to a certain volume of water per month. And if you buy a property that is situated like that, you don't have to ask for the water company stock, it runs with the land. It goes along with the sale. It is an appurtenant item. So that's what water company stock is about. The next blank, let's fill in water rights. Water rights. Owners to land have certain water rights that just go with the sale of the property. The next blank, fill in mineral rights. Mineral rights. And the final blank, fill in the word easements. Easements. These are examples of appurtenances. Now, Statement 12 tells us a little bit more about what an appurtenance is. An appurtenance is an additional thing or benefit, fill in the word additional, that runs with or is sold with the land. It belongs with the land, such as water rights. An appurtenance does not exist apart from the land to which it belongs. So appurtenances are actually considered real property. And if you see a question that involves one of these items, just know that it is considered real property because it runs with the land. It means that we don't have to have a separate contract for it. It doesn't have to be mentioned in the purchase contract, and it doesn't require separate conveyance, doesn't even have to be mentioned in the deed, but it does just go with the sale of the property. We have this term appropriation, Statement 13. Appropriation is the private taking and use of public property, such as water from a river or lake, right in public property. Appropriation is the private taking and use of public property, such as water from a river or a lake. The river or lake may be considered public property, but certain people, landowners adjacent to those bodies of water, have the right to take a reasonable amount of water from those bodies of water, and this is called appropriation. Now we have a couple of terms here, riparian rights and littoral rights. Statement 14 says, riparian rights are rights of a landowner to water flowing adjacent to his or her land within the normal activities of a stream or river. Fill in the word river. Now, easy to remember what riparian rights are because the word riparian starts with the letter R, and it refers to the rights to the landowner to a body of water that is a moving water course. And everybody knows that a river is a moving water course. So R for river, R for riparian, and you've connected those two. The other one is what is called littoral rights, Statement 15, and these are rights of a landowner to water abutting their land, in other words, a shoreline, such as an ocean or a lake. Fill in the word lake. So it's the same thing as far as water rights, but it's a different kind of body of water. It is a body of water that has a shoreline, such as a lake. So we do this again, L for littoral and L for lake. And so we can easily remember the connection there and tell the difference between riparian rights and littoral rights. Now let's talk about personal property. Personal property is generally regarded as movable property. Fill in the word movable in Statement 16. Tables and chairs in the room, furniture in a house is personal property. It is movable. You can put it into the back of a truck and haul it away. Statement 17 says personal property is sometimes referred to as chose. Write in the word chose. If you see that word, just know that it refers to personal property. Statement 18 says emblements are a tenant's crops growing and produced annually through labor and industry. They must be replanted every year and are considered personal property. Write in personal property. Corn is of that nature. Any crop that has to be planted and cultivated every year to be produced is regarded as personal property because, it again gets to the relationship here. We have a tenant. We have someone who is creating through industry that crop, and that crop will belong to them or whatever other legal rights may have been ascertained by agreement. Statement number 19, when the fruit is removed or sold under contract, it is considered personal property. Let's say we have trees with fruit on them. Well, we've said that those trees would be real property, but when the fruit is sold under contract or removed and put into the back of a truck, it has become personal property. Statement 20 says leasehold estates are called chattel real. Write in the word chattel real, rhymes with cattle. Leasehold estates are called chattel real and are considered personal property. So we need to recognize that personal properties, all these things we've been talking about. But leasehold estates in real property are also considered personal property. Now let's talk about this idea of estates. Statement 21 says the concept of an estate tells us how long someone has an interest in the property, write in how long, and what kind of interest it is, how long and what kind. Estates are divided into two basic categories, freehold and less than freehold estates. Write in freehold and less than freehold estates. A freehold estate is some type of ownership interest, and a less than freehold estate is some type of leasing or renting interest. And Statement 23 says estates are held by both tenants in a rented apartment and owners who live in their own condominiums. So fill in tenants and owners. Each one has an estate, but obviously it is a different kind of estate. And it goes to the issue of freehold or less than freehold. Let's talk about freehold estates. Statement 24 says a freehold estate involves some kind of ownership interest in the property. So write in the word ownership. And there are different kinds of freehold estates. Statement 25 talks about the fee simple absolute estate. It is a freehold estate that represents the highest degree of ownership available. Write in the word highest. Its duration is indefinite. I would say that most people who own their own homes probably own a fee simple absolute estate. They simply own it with this highest degree of ownership. Now remember, they never own it with absolute power because it's always subject to the government controls and possible claims of others. But it is the highest degree of ownership available. And because of that, its duration is indefinite, meaning they can own it all of their lives and even transfer it to someone else upon their death through their will or their estate. So fee simple absolute is what people desire in the ownership of real property. They have the most control with this kind of ownership. Another type of freehold estate is called fee simple defeasible. And what this means is that title can be defeated because ownership has been qualified by a condition, right in the word condition. Classic example is the acreage, and it's more than 4,000 acres that comprise Griffith Park in the Los Angeles area. And years ago, when Mr. Griffith deeded this land to the city of Los Angeles, he loved the Los Angeles area. He was a successful businessman, obviously an entrepreneur, and he enjoyed Southern California and especially Los Angeles. So he donated this land to the city for a park. What he had in mind was that all people could enjoy the area as much as he had, and he established a condition in the granting of title that the city could never charge a fee for entrance into Griffith Park. And if you've ever been to Griffith Park, you may recall you're just able to drive in and enjoy the land and picnic areas and so forth. Well, the story is told that some time ago, the city officials were trying to figure out a way to raise some more money. And the idea was proposed that they begin to charge a fee for entrance into Griffith Park. But fortunately, the city attorneys were doing their job, reading the fine print, and they discovered this condition. And had the city gone ahead and violated the condition, there's a forfeiture clause, and they were in jeopardy of actually losing title to all of this land. It would have gone to the heirs of the Griffith family. And so this is what a condition does. It creates a situation where if the owner violates the condition, they can actually lose title to the property. This is called a fee simple defeasible estate. Another type of estate that is a freehold estate is called a life estate. Statement number 27. It says a life estate is another type of freehold estate. It is set up so that grantor A conveys the estate to B, and the estate endures for the life of C. Now, it could be that, or it could be that when the estate is conveyed to B, it might be based upon his own life, the duration of his own life. But it could be this as well. It says, while B owns the life estate, B has the right of use and possession, right in use and possession, and can sell the estate, lease it, or encumber it. But whatever has been done terminates upon the death of C in this example, and the estate reverts back to the original grantor. And I want to show you a chart which demonstrates this type of interest in real property. In this case, we begin with Amy, who owns the property but deeds a life estate to Bill. And this one is set up so that the duration of the estate is based on the life of Bill. And it makes good sense that way, because when Bill dies, he obviously will have no more need for the property. And so upon his death, Amy holds an estate in reversion while he is the life tenant. He's occupying the property, he's using it, he's enjoying it. But when he dies, the estate reverts back to Amy. So it is set up as a temporary ownership situation. It is set up so that Bill, in this case, can enjoy that property and use it for the rest of his natural life. And when he dies, he has no more use for the estate, and so it reverts back to Amy, and she once again has her ownership of the property. So it is a way of avoiding the time and expense of probate, and it is used sometimes with that particular issue in mind. Let's talk about less than freehold estates. Statement 28 says, a less than freehold estate involves some kind of leasing or renting interest in the property. Let's write in leasing or renting. And statement 29, just a little bit different way of saying it, a less than freehold estate involves the rights of tenants who rent or lease property. Write in rent or lease. And statement 30, kind of a reminder of what we covered under personal property, coming at it from a little different direction. Statement 30 says a less than freehold estate is considered personal property. We wanted to mention this in the personal property section and in the less than freehold estate section, so that we do not miss that concept on the test. A less than freehold estate is considered personal property. Statement 31 says a leasehold interest is the right to exclusive possession and use of real property for a fixed period of time held by the lessee or tenant. Write in lessee and tenant. So the lessee is the one who holds a leasehold interest in the property. Statement 32 says the landlord is the lessor, write in lessor in a lease, and has parted with the right of exclusive possession during the existence of the lease. Statement 33, a reminder that a leasehold estate is known as chattel real and is considered personal property. Write in chattel real and personal property. Now, there are different kinds of less than freehold estates. Statement 34 talks about an estate for years is a lease which continues for a definite period of time fixed in advance as agreed between the landlord and the tenant. And it could be for a period of time less than a year, such as 6 months. Let's write in 6 months. The name may be confusing because it's called an estate for years, but it doesn't necessarily have to be for a multiple years, like 2 years. It could be for a number of months or a number of weeks or a number of days. All it means is we have a definite beginning point and a definite ending point. And you might see the duration of the estate expressed in terms of one date to another date. But in the principles courses, you have seen probably 6 months as an example of an estate for years. Statement number 35, an estate from period to period is one that continues for certain periods of time as agreed between landlord and tenant. The most common lease of this type is the month-to-month tenancy. Write in month-to-month. We're all familiar with the month-to-month tenancy. Statement 36, when a tenant has rightfully come into possession of the property, but remains in possession after the expiration of the term, the tenant is holding an estate at sufferance. Write in estate at sufferance. Easy to remember this. The tenant has stayed too long, so the landlord is now suffering with the tenant. This is an estate at sufferance held by the lessee. Now let's talk about this word tenancy. Tenancy in this context means that it is a way or a method of holding title. So statement 37 says title to real property can be held in different ways. Tenancy is a method of holding title. Let's write in holding title. Statement 38 talks about one way of holding title. Ownership in severalty is ownership by one person. Let's write in one person, a single individual. Ownership rights are severed from any other person. I think I remember the first time I saw this word many years ago, and I thought, this one I got figured out. Several people must own this property. And that would be wrong. You have to go to the root of the word, which is sever, which means it severs anybody else's interest except one individual. You might see the phrase sole ownership used in this type of ownership as well. Statement number 39, joint tenancy is a way of holding title by two or more persons who are joint and equal owners of the same undivided interest in the property. Let's write in joint and equal. So this is a common way of people holding title to the property. Married couples often hold title to the property that they live in as joint tenants. And it says the owners have the same undivided interest in the real property. Undivided means you cannot tell where one owner's interest ends and another's begins. It is undivided. Both owners or all owners have access to all of the property. Now, statement number 40 says to create a joint tenancy, 4 items must come together. And we have this acronym here, TTIP. Let's fill in the blanks. Time, title, interest, and possession. Time, title, interest, and possession.